Welcome to Chapter 13, The Global Economy. Most nations have had dreams of expansion, even large expansion or global domination, all the way from the Tower of Babel right after the flood to the modern age. America thought the concept of manifest destiny means that we deserve all the land from sea to shining sea, no matter who owns it. Currently, we're going to take it, and everyone in between. Rome, the Mongols, Hitler. Everyone's tried to conquer their neighbors. Is a one world government evil? If you hear the phrase one world government, of course you're instantly going to be thinking of Antichrist, the devil, Hitler trying to take over the world. Of course, we're not talking about a one world government in economics classes. We're just talking about international cooperation. The Bible does not condemn international or global cooperation, of course. Christians get scared or spooked at the concept of international cooperation because the Antichrist is described as controlling most of the world. But that's not what Revelation says is bad about the Antichrist. The Antichrist is not wrong for being a political leader. He's wrong for trying to kill all the Jews and Christians with his large power and influence. I knew a guy who thought that the internet was a sign of the times, that because you can upload a video in Australia and watch it in America, that just means that the Antichrist is going to take over the world tomorrow. And I don't think that's a legit explanation of Revelation. The sin of Babel was not necessarily trying to have a strong empire. The sin of Babel was that God told them, scatter and fill the earth. And they said, no, we don't want to scatter. We want to stay right here. It was a clear disobedience of a clear command. That command we've largely fulfilled. People have filled just about the entire earth. There's not very many empty spaces left. And we even have people in Antarctica. The world is growing smaller. Not physically, obviously, not literally, but the distances that keep us away from each other seem to be less and less with every coming year. And that is due to communication and travel. Communication is near instantaneous. You can pick up a cell phone and call anyone in the world, and there will be hardly any delay. You can have an easy conversation with them. You can get on the internet and talk face to face with anyone in the world. With travel, if you have enough money, well, and if we weren't in a pandemic right now, you could go to Portland and hop on a plane, and you could be in England in a couple hours. You could be in China in less than 12 hours. If you had the money to buy a one-way ticket on very, very short notice. You could go anywhere in the world within 24 hours, guarantee it. That is amazing. Your book talks about the facsimile machine helping the world grow smaller. Oh, this picture with all these green lines, these are all internet cables and phone cables, high-speed fiber optics cables that are physically linking the world. The first telegraph cable put across the Atlantic Ocean was done right after the Civil War. They had to try several times because it kept on breaking, but I think it's pretty cool that they have these 1800s era steamships, and they're just lowering these giant cables all the way to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Globalism is the philosophy that focuses on international politics rather than local politics, minimizes the global or the local community in favor of the global community. I am a citizen of Earth, that kind of thing. Very much shown in Star Trek. Star Trek is highly political. If you watch something like The Next Generation, they constantly talk about how the warring nations of Earth got together into this one government, and now everyone loves each other and there's no problems because it's the future. In the financial sector, free markets are a big part of globalism, where they push for being able to buy or sell anything anywhere in the world, regardless of national boundaries. So if I have a toothpick factory in Maine, which apparently is a big part of Maine's economy, or was at one point, I think like 3/4 of the world's toothpicks were made in Maine at one point in time. Anyway, if you make toothpicks in Maine, you should be able to sell them in Saudi Arabia or New Zealand or Argentina with hardly any trouble. Politically, the globalists are thinking for ways for governments to work together peacefully and find peaceful solutions to their problems. There's been many attempts at this, the League of Nations, the UN, and many smaller groups trying to prevent war. Scientifically, if we all put our minds together, then we can come up with solutions to different problems. As the Cold War was winding down, one of the ways that we tried to cooperate with the USSR and show that we don't all want to kill each other is that we had our rocket scientists, our space people, work together on making satellites and things. And we built the International Space Station together. There are parts on the International Space Station from literally dozens of different countries from around the world. That's pretty cool. Globalism has many advantages, and we'll look at those advantages in this PowerPoint, but it also has downsides. There is no perfect economic system. There just isn't. You have to look at your philosophy to tell you which perks do you want and what are you willing to give up. The downsides to globalism is less local control. Your government doesn't have as much control over your people's buying and selling and over your economy as you might wish. Conservatives look at globalism and are torn because conservatives love the free market. That is the cornerstone of capitalism, is I should be able to buy whatever I feel like, and I should be able to sell my items to whoever feels like buying them. So most conservatives are all for trade deals around the world. They really want good trade deals around the world. But then conservatives are also typically really like local government. Not only, the United States government should control the United States, but, going further to state governments as well should have more power. So should conservatives be pro-globalist? Well, they kind of like some parts of it and not other parts. Unfortunately, you can't have your cake and eat it too. The UN was founded at the Yalta Conference right at the end of World War II. Stalin and Truman and Attlee for England were there, and they were making decisions for how to run the world after the war was over. And it's pretty much the League of Nations 2.0. They want to promote world peace, try to make sure that World War II never happens again. There are 193 nations in the UN currently, and the UN is composed of three major parts. The first part is the General Assembly. Each nation gets one vote in the General Assembly, although they might have several ambassadors going there, and they make speeches and discuss issues, and they can't pass laws, but they pass what's called resolutions. Resolutions is the UN saying we ought to do this, or this nation should stop doing that. A bunch of politicians talking to one another. The UN Security Council is probably the branch that you're most familiar with. There are 5 permanent members on the Security Council, and these 5 have veto power. Whenever any one of these 5 says no, then whatever's on the table is done. Those 5 permanent members are China, France, Russia, the UK, and the United States. If you wonder why that group, those were the Allies after World War II. So, yeah. And then there's 5 more, so 10 total, and they are on a rotating basis. They get elected to the Security Council. So right now it's Belgium, the Dominican Republic, Germany, Indonesia, and South Africa. You might notice that China, Russia, and the 3 Western nations on the Security Council, England, France, and the US, don't get along very well. And so it has been one of the hardest things for the UN to pass a war resolution, because whatever they try to do, either China and Russia don't like, so they veto, or America and France and England don't like, so one of them vetoes. So the UN Security Council has not been able to do as much as they would hope. Also, sometimes some rather aggressive, bad nations get elected to the Security Council. That's always interesting. The UN hires peacekeepers, soldiers, that they get from participating countries, and those peacekeepers are sent around the world on various missions. Sometimes they are there to try to prevent a war. If it seems like war might break out, they'll go there to try to keep the peace, try to put down riots and things like that. Sometimes they are sent to wage war. like in Korea. The top 10 providers of the United States, or of the United Nations Peacekeeper Force. See, the United States sends almost a third of the peacekeeper soldiers. China sends about half of that, and Japan about half of China's. So when the UN decides that it needs to send soldiers somewhere, that really means America is sending soldiers. Most other nations are sending only a couple percent of the UN soldiers. We're sending a third. So there's 193 nations, but America's providing 1/3 of the soldiers. I don't remember the exact percentage of the money that is given to the UN, but once again, America gives way more money to the UN than any other nation does. The World Trade Organization tries to work for free trade. There are many nations that have very restricted trade, and they try to get in those nations and open them up for trade. If there is a trade dispute where two nations can't decide who owns what resources or how much a resource ought to be charged for, the World Trade Organization can step in and arbitrate a dispute. And arbitration is when both sides say, we will agree with whatever decision you make. So often two countries come to the WTO and say, well, you're a third party, you make the decision. There are similar smaller trade agreements. One that America's been in is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which has just recently been revised and changed to the US, Mexico, Canada agreement. That is obviously just 3 nations in that one, but still trying to help our 3 nations in North America to work together just to make trade easier so that all 3 of us will be wealthier. There's been some issues with this. In Mexico especially, when we started this, they started buying a lot of our corn because we can grow corn a lot cheaper than they can because we have tools and tractors and things. A lot of the impoverished farmers in southern Mexico didn't. So the price of corn dropped so much that poor Mexican farmers were kind of going bankrupt, and that was kind of sad. But overall, trade deals do make a lot of money. Maybe you've heard of the European Economic, I don't know what the C stands for. It's in your book somewhere. It's been reorganized into the EU, European Union, which is a union of political and economic decisions over all of Europe. I'm sure you've heard of Brexit in the news. England has decided that they don't want to be part of the European Union anymore. And this has been kind of bungled by their politicians. It's been 2 years since they decided to get out, and they still haven't decided what it will look like when they leave. They have not made any other trade deals. It's been really, really terrible. Lots of drama for England. Why do we want, or why do some people want to have international trade agreements? Because the larger market you have, the more effective it is. Just think, a grocery store in Antarctica is not going to be nearly as effective as a grocery store in the middle of a big city. The more people that there are, the better your market's going to be, because there's more buyers and because there's more sellers. It's good for everyone. There is a lot of hassle trying to cross borders. I've been to Canada many times, and that's hardly ever a hassle. But I've never, imported anything or exported anything. And the Canada border is odd, internationally speaking. Most borders are more difficult to get through than Canada, but there are buddies, so we do that. It is a lot of hassle to try to sell something in a foreign country. There's language barriers, there's money barriers, but they don't use the same kind of money as you do. There's law barriers where something that might be legal in one nation is not legal in another nation. Have you heard of Kinder eggs? They're these little chocolate eggs with toys inside, and they've been illegal in America for a long time. You can only get them in Canada. Border stops, no currency changing, no local laws and regulations changing. If you have something like the European Union, the EU made their own money called the euro, where you replace all the different nations' money with one money for everyone. It was highly effective. Globalization is very effective at making money. And this is an economic class, so we're interested in making money. But is making money the only reason to make a political decision or economic decision? No, absolutely not. Just because globalism makes money does not mean that we should automatically go 100% globalist. Just like capitalism, just because it makes money doesn't mean that it's good to do. Teddy Roosevelt said, "The man who loves other countries as much as his own stands on a level with the man who loves other women as much as his wife." That's very interesting. We're not citizens of the world. We're citizens of America. And we should not look down on other people, but it just makes sense that you love your country and you work for your country's benefit more than for other countries. Free trade isn't exactly free. There is no such thing as absolutely free trade. Free trade is regulated and controlled by an organization. Well, if that organization is looking over multiple nations, then that organization can't be run by one nation's government. So there will be an outside group that's controlling many different nations, or at least their economic policies, and that is not run by a single government. That organization is going to have who knows how many people working for them, secretaries and policymakers and all that, and scientists and economic advisors, and it costs billions of dollars to run the UN and the World Trade Organization and the World Bank. It costs a lot of money for all those bankers. Besides that, they have a lot less economic accountability to the public compared to the United States Congress, for instance. We have a new election coming up in, just about 6 months. And if you don't like the decisions that your congressman made, you can vote for someone else. Have you ever voted for a World Trade Organization leader? I don't think so. Have you ever picked the United States ambassador to the UN? I haven't. President Trump did. He picked Nikki Haley from South Carolina. I remember her because she was governor in South Carolina when I lived there. So they have a lot less accountability to the public, but they're still making important economic decisions for Americans, and that can be frustrating. International organizations diminish national sovereignty. They take away power from your nation's government. So that's the downside. They might make money, but they also take away national sovereignty. That is why England chose Brexit. By the way, it was a very, very close vote. It's like 49 to 51%, where you ask the nation, would you rather have more money and less sovereignty or more sovereignty and less money? And the nation was very divided, but barely chose, we want a little more sovereignty. When a different nation does something you don't like, usually there's two options. You can coerce them with money, saying, well, I'll trade with you more if you do this, or maybe I'll stop trading with you altogether if you do that. Or you could fight them. A World Trade Organization kind of takes away your ability to coerce people with money, and it leaves one other option, coercing them with force. And I don't know if we want to take away the monetary option all that much. For instance, the World Trade Organization says you have to treat everyone the way that you treat the most preferred country. That is the nicest you are to anyone, you have to treat everyone the same way. Well, what about China? China's nasty. They're not a good government. They're bad to their own people. Should we give them the same kind of economic laws and deals, trade deals, as we give to Canada? Canada's our best friend. They're great. We like them. We've cooperated on many different issues for many different years. But the World Trade Organization wants us to treat China and Canada the exact same way. I don't think so. A bilateral agreement is two nations working out a trade deal, and that gives a lot more flexibility to treat different nations differently. Iran's trying to build a nuclear weapon? Fine, we're not going to sell you the kinds of tools that you need to make that. We're not going to sell you anything to try to starve your economy out. North Korea's awful? Well, we're not going to sell you stuff. We're going to treat some nations better than others based on how they treat us. Romans 12:18 says, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live at peace with all men. That's a great verse. It works for interpersonal disputes as well as international disputes. If it's possible, whenever possible, live at peace. Peace is amazing. Well, peace is not always possible, either between two people or between two nations. Unfortunately, we live in a fallen world. Waging wars of aggression, I hope you understand, is not good. It's not what God wants. God does not want us to attack our neighbors to take their money and their land. Has America done that before? Yes. Ask any Native American. We have broken so many alliances with Native American nations. And so sad. Much of the land that we have taken from the North American continent has been taken wrongly. Now, we haven't done that recently. That's good. We are in a position, though, where we do have enemies. There are people who wish us harm. Should we get rid of our army so that we can have world peace? No, that wouldn't work. People can and will attack us if they sense weakness. We should be able to defend ourselves and defend our allies, the little guys. The first Gulf War happened when Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait, which was teeny, teeny, tiny, and we had to defend our buddy. Strong trade agreements discourage war. We make a lot of money off of trade with China, and China makes a lot of money off of trade with us. That does discourage war because we know if war breaks out, we don't get all this stuff made in China. But trade agreements never prevent war. Hitler and England had very robust trade right before World War II. And that did not stop Hitler. He would rather start a war than make money off of, I don't know, importing British tea and crumpets. The UN has a varied record. There are some times where they have kept peace, where they have brokered peace. There's been times when two factions or two nations say, we can't decide on a peace deal. Can the UN help us out? And the UN said, yes, we'll help you. Unfortunately, there have been many failures of the UN as well. Often, one large important nation like China or Russia will be very aggressive. They'll attack people, they will kill people, and the UN says, well, we don't want to fight you, because that would basically start World War III. So we don't want to start World War III, so we're going to do nothing. And it's very frustrating when the UN is all too willing to help in one situation and then completely ignores another situation. There's so many of these. Remember the Boston bombers? They were Chechenian. Chechnya is a region of southern Russia that was independent from Russia, and Russia's treated them terribly. They've gone in with poison gas. There's been a lot of violence there, back and forth, and it's no wonder that the young people of Chechnya are angry and want to take out their anger on someone and turn to terrorism. It's a bad situation. And what do we do when Vladimir Putin uses illegal chemical weapons on his own citizens? Nothing. True world peace is not going to happen until Jesus comes. A effective world government will not happen until Jesus is king of the world. But I've heard some people say, well, because Jesus is the only one who can have world peace, why even bother trying? No, trying for peace is good. We cannot prevent every war. But can we prevent one war? Can we save one life? Helping out in one situation is better than just giving up. America and other rich nations, I think, do have a moral responsibility to help those in need. We all have a responsibility to help those in need, whether at home or abroad. Globalism takes that a step further and really says that we are responsible for other people's problems when we're really not. And what is the best way to help those in need? Should it be... Should it be charity or uncharity? Charity is giving a man a fish. Uncharity is teaching him how to fish. Charity is providing food and clothing. Uncharity is building a factory. Should we help with these massive international global initiatives or with a local private organization? Some nations have borrowed money from the UN for 30 plus years. Some nations have gotten food from the UN for 30 plus years in a row. I am all for helping whenever and wherever we can. But unfortunately, if we are just giving free food to whoever wants it, it does teach them sometimes to be addicted to that aid and reliant on us. And instead of helping, we've just made a long-term problem of them being reliant on foreign aid. That's no way to live. Many of the root causes of other nations requiring aid can't be fixed by charity. Sometimes there's a hurricane or an earthquake and we want to step in and help. Great, sure. But sometimes the government is way overtaxing the people and then steals all that money for themselves and doesn't spend that money on infrastructure or anything for the people. So the government is oppressing the people, and then the UN steps up and does for the people what their own government ought to do with their own tax dollars. Well, then what are we doing? We are enabling a wicked government to get away with its wickedness. They steal everything from the people, and the people know, they'll just get it from the UN. Oh, maybe if we didn't provide aid, of course things would be bad, but maybe it would be bad enough that they would revolt against their government and get a better one. The UN is all about environmentalism and global warming recently. Some environmentalism is wise use of our resources and is totally biblical and something that we should stand for. Christians should be anti-pollution because this is the world that God has made. God has told us to be wise stewards of this earth, and if we can reduce pollution, we ought to reduce pollution. When I was a kid, it was very commonplace to just chuck all your trash out of your car window as you're driving down the highway. Highways would be littered with plastic and glass bottles and McDonald's wrappers and old diapers, and it was nasty. And one positive part of the green movement is that doesn't really happen anymore. That's nice. I don't want to see trash along the side of the road. Christians should not be doing that. But I'm sure you know that environmentalism can and is taken to an absolutely crazy extreme sometimes. The UN has put forth a resolution saying that the US commits environmental aggression. That's just laughable. The US today is by far not the worst polluter in the world. There are nations in the world that just dump all their trash in the ocean. America doesn't. The UN tries to prevent environmental disasters. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima Daiichi were all power plants, nuclear power plants that failed in one way or another. Chernobyl was the worst, just exploded, and there's radioactive gas and dust flying up in the air. 3 Mile Island was crisis averted, but there was still some damage. Fukushima Daiichi in Japan, there was a big tidal wave that cracked a wall and caused a lot of radiation damage. Love Canal is a crazy story in America, how there was a toxic chemical dumping waste site that the company put a thin layer of dirt on and then built houses on top of it and sold all these houses and started this new neighborhood, and then all the kids got sick and died. And when people found out that, oh, our houses are above feet of toxic waste, well, that was a problem that was absolutely unnecessary. The American private sector has done a good job in what I call win-win environmentalism, where it's good for business and it's good for the environment and it's good for everyone. For instance, we have more acres of forest in America today than when your parents were kids. When your parents were kids, the logging companies were over-logging, and they realized, hey, I'm running out of trees. So they said, what's the best way to make our logging company effective and profitable in the long run? Well, we better plant trees. And so now they're planting more trees than they're harvesting, and now there's more acreage for it. That's great. That helps everybody. It's good for the environment. It's good for the planet. It's good for the paper companies. It's good for everyone. Sustainable is a key word now. Sustainable fishing, sustainable agriculture, making sure that we're not destroying the land, but that it will be useful for the future, for future generations. Did you know that solar panels now are cheaper and more effective than coal in some parts of the world? In the southern regions, closer to the equator. Hey, if it's cheaper and it's cleaner, well, then what's the problem here? That's a win-win. That's great. Most companies are trying to get more energy efficient in everything they do, from houses being better insulated to cars running on less gasoline. And again, that's good for everyone. Better miles per gallon is good for the driver. It's good for the environment. Scrubbing the pollution that's coming out of a car, that's good for your lungs. It's really good. That's win-win. And that's something that individual private companies like Ford, they're doing that, not the government and not the UN telling them to do that. Private companies have done a better job than the UN has. In conclusion, cooperation takes compromise. It always does. Sometimes those compromises are acceptable, where you wanted the trade to be, at X% and they wanted it Y%. So you meet in the middle. Okay, we got a compromise. Sometimes those compromises are really unacceptable. When we allow a group like the UN or the World Trade Organization or the IMF to make decisions for us, we're delegating authority to them. Delegating authority is not necessarily bad, but you do have to be careful who you're delegating authority to. America is one of the most free nations in the world. We definitely value freedom a lot more than other nations do. Many other nations would rather have a better economy than more freedom. They say, well, if it puts more money in my pocket, who cares who's making the decisions? Who cares if I have oversight of the decisions? All Americans care. 51% of the British care. The UN and these other groups can't tell us what to do. And when they try, often America just says, nah. But we passed a resolution. America says, no thanks. We don't feel like doing that. Now, the UN gets angry at us sometimes when we just ignore their recommendations and orders, but we're like, hey, we're giving you all your money and all your soldiers, so what you gonna do? I will say, if you're an American and you think the UN has too much power, just remember that if they ever do make a stupid decision, the American government will probably just completely ignore it. So rest easy there.